Come join me on my second channel, Jaguar Gator 8, where we'll talk all things college football. New video drops every Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Click the card in the upper right corner to watch the latest video. And now, on with our feature presentation. I want you to imagine this scenario. You're on an NFL team, and you're going to the game not even expecting to play. I don't mean you're not expecting to play because you're the backup, a la Tom Brady coming in for Drew Bledsoe. I mean that you're injured. You've told everyone that you're not playing, the coaching staff has you listed on the injury report as not playing, and every media member and fan knows that you're not playing because of it. You're out there in street clothes, not even warming up because you're injured. And then, at the very last minute, and I mean the very last minute, you wind up suiting up. You win the game, and you have what is hands down the best game of your entire career. Something like this seems almost unthinkable, especially with how the injury report works today and how the inactive list is put out 90 minutes before the game, before the team even warms up. However, as crazy as this scenario sounds, in 1979, that's exactly what happened with the Baltimore Colts. This is tight end Reese McCall. When the day started, he was listed as inactive. When the day ended, he was the talk of the town after scoring 2 touchdowns completely out of nowhere. From not being able to suit up to not being able to be stopped by the defense. This is the story behind the most surprising game by a tight end in the over 100-year history of the NFL. Before I talk about the game in question, we need some context to understand just who Reese McCall is and how he was doing so far in his career. Because if you think that short description of that performance is insane, I promise you, it's going to get crazier when you realize how little he had done so far in his career. Our story begins in 1978, when the Baltimore Colts, with the 25th pick in the NFL draft, chose Auburn tight end Reese McCall at the end of the first round. The pick made a ton of sense. Raymond Chester had been the team's tight end for the past 4 seasons, but after the 1977 season, he became incredibly disgruntled and unhappy with the management in Baltimore, and would eventually get traded back to the Oakland Raiders, where he started his career. And at Auburn, McCall lit it up and established himself as one of the best tight ends in the SEC and the entire NCAA, as in his 3 years with the Tigers, well, to be honest, even though the position made sense, the actual player was a major question mark. He had 13 receptions for 201 yards and no touchdowns his entire collegiate career. That's right, the Colts drafted a tight end in the first round to replace a 3-time Pro Bowler that did not score a single touchdown in college. You always know it's a good sign when the assistant general manager, Ernie Accorsi, is defending the pick to reporters by saying on the criticism, well, it's a gamble. And you know it's always a good sign when Colts head coach Ted Marchibroda admitted straight up after drafting him that he wasn't the guy they were targeting, as they wanted running back Elvis Peacock instead. Considering the fact that Peacock finished his entire NFL career with a mere 1,001 yards, I think it's safe to say the Colts dodged a bullet there, and McCall would be better by default. However, let's just say that early on to start his career, McCall wasn't exactly inspiring a whole lot of confidence in the people who doubted him and his lack of production. He was not a starter, as he spent most of the season sitting behind veteran tight end Mac Alston, who we'll talk more about in a bit. In his rookie season, McCall had just 11 receptions for 160 yards and a touchdown. Granted, the touchdown he had was a great one, and came in a shocking upset victory on Monday Night Football against Washington. But I think you want a lot more out of your first-round pick. When you're drafting a replacement for a 3-time Pro Bowler, and his main objective is to catch the ball, and he finishes 7th on the team in catches, that's not pretty no matter how you slice it. Baltimore was hoping that McCall would be able to do a bit more in his second season, and that the 6'7" tight end would play more of an impact. And to be fair, it seemed like things were finally starting to click. After a slow start to the season, where he was held without a catch in 2 of his first 4 games, and combined for just 3 catches and 28 yards with no touchdowns over the first quarter of the season, things started to pick up, as from weeks 5 through 7, he had 13 receptions for 151 yards and 2 touchdowns, including the only touchdown of a 10-8 victory in week 6 over the division rival New York Jets. Obviously, you can't exactly extrapolate that to a full 16-game season accurately, but if it was, and you got a tight end that had 69 receptions for 805 yards and 10 touchdowns, I'm sure any team would be thrilled with that. McCall was in the starting lineup, and for the first time in his career, maybe even spanning back to high school, he was a true contributor in the passing game. However, just as things were starting to look on the up for McCall, his momentum got put to a screeching halt. Again, McCall was starting to get things going. He had 3 consecutive games with at least 3 receptions. Prior to that stretch, he had 2 of those games his entire career combined. But right as he was starting to become a key part in Baltimore's offense, especially in the passing game, he went a little too hard in practice and got injured. On Wednesday, October 17th, 4 days before they were set to travel to Buffalo to take on the Bills, McCall tried to field a pass that was just out of his reach. He dove for the ball and landed awkwardly, injuring his shoulder in the process. Just like that, McCall was now out and would not be playing in that contest. Nor would he be playing the following week against the New England Patriots. Oddly enough, despite starting 1-6, and despite not having McCall, the Colts wound up winning both of those games, defeating Buffalo 14-13 and New England 31-26. The man that got the start for McCall at tight end in those games was this man right here. This is Mack Alston, and he was a veteran tight end and an incredibly capable backup, even serving as the team's starting tight end over McCall for most of the 1978 season. Alston had been in the league since 1970, when Washington chose him back in the 11th round of the NFL draft, and he was going on a decade in the league, which is incredible for anyone, let alone an 11th rounder who was never expected to make it onto a roster. By this point in his career, spending time with Washington, Houston, and Baltimore, Alston had 106 receptions for 1,223 yards and 15 touchdowns. Again, he was a solid number 2 tight end who could fill in if necessary, especially for a situation like this with McCall's injury. And I'm sure Colts fans weren't complaining about Alston when in one of those 2 games that he started, which was that 14-13 victory over the Bills, he scored the game-winning touchdown from 4 yards out late in the fourth quarter to help the Colts erase a 13-7 deficit. With that, we head to Memorial Stadium. It's November 4th, 1979, and the Baltimore Colts are playing the Cincinnati Bengals in this AFC matchup. Oddly enough, this is not the first video I've done about the 1979 Bengals and just how bad they were, because trust me, this team was really bad. If you want to learn more about just how inept they were, with one game that was so bad that NBC announcers working their game against the Dallas Cowboys bashed their lack of effort, click the card in the upper right corner. This was one of the least anticipated games of the entire season, and I'm not even going to try to hype this one up. The Bengals were 2-7, and the Colts were 3-6. Every other team in the AFC had at least 4 wins, so both of their seasons were completely toast barring an absolute miracle. The Colts had the worst offense in the AFC, the Bengals had the second worst defense in the AFC, and neither team really had a whole lot going for them. However, for the purposes of this story, the important thing is that for the 3rd straight week, Reese McCall was going to be sidelined with that shoulder injury, and Mack Alston was going to be in the game. Which is why what happened on the field that day stunned everyone. On the day of the game, the Baltimore Sun put out a pregame report, and the report said tight end Mack Alston will play instead of second-year man Reese McCall, who has a shoulder injury. They didn't say is expected to, they didn't say likely, they didn't say probably, they said will. Will is an incredibly powerful word. If someone says that something will happen, that's the end of the discussion. There is no ambiguity or potential for misinterpretation. Which is why no one was shocked when during pregame warmups, McCall was out there in street clothes. He was not going to play. Mack Alston, for the 3rd straight week, was going to be lining up at tight end, and was hoping that he could have another good performance in relief as the Colts could maybe turn their season around and win their 3rd straight game. But during the pregame warmups, Alston got hurt and twisted his knee. I dug high and low and I could not find any information about how he twisted his knee. However, 1 hour before the game, Alston was ruled out. And that was a problem, because due to some incredible roster management on the part of the Colts, they legitimately had no one at tight end. I don't even mean that they didn't have anyone good or competent. They had 0 tight ends. This was the roster put out before the game. The Colts had 2 tight ends, Reese McCall and Mack Alston, and both of them were hurt. How no one on Baltimore had the foresight to recognize this and sign another tight end, I have no clue. So what was Baltimore supposed to do? They got Reese McCall out there. Even though he didn't warm up, and even though he was nagging a shoulder injury, and even though he was listed as out, he was going in the game. As McCall said afterwards, Mack had some problems before the game. I told the coach I felt like I could go, and he said, "You've got to go." This is what the Colts had come to at this point. The bruised, battered, hobbled, and injured Reese McCall, despite not expecting to play, and despite not even preparing to play, was somehow going to be starting at tight end. Now, I've done plenty of videos on players not expecting to play and then lighting it up. A few years before this game, Cincinnati experienced the same thing on the other side, when quarterback John Reeves was told 15 minutes before game time against the Houston Oilers that he would be starting in place of Ken Anderson, and he lit it up and had a career day. You can learn more about that remarkable performance by clicking the card in the upper right corner. But that was a backup not expecting to play over a starter. We've never seen anything like this, where a guy was not expecting to play period due to injury and was now being thrust in at the last minute despite being ruled out and despite not being the slightest bit healthy. So naturally, on this day, Reese McCall had the best game of his entire career. The Baltimore Colts won their third straight game, defeating the hapless Cincinnati Bengals by a final score of 38-28. It wasn't really the fact that they won the game that was surprising. Again, the Bengals were terrible and were 0-4 on the road entering this one, and the Colts entered as 3-point favorites. Rather, it was how the Colts won that was truly shocking. The worst offense in the AFC, and an offense that scored less than 15 points per game, put up a season-high 38, and did it with two different quarterbacks, as Greg Landry was forced to go into the game when Burt Jones got hurt. As a side note, to learn more about Greg Landry and how he became a Colt in the first place, click the card on the upper right corner. A pitiful run defense that allowed over 134 yards per game and allowed the Oilers to run for 220 yards not even a month before held the Bengals to 67 yards on a mere 2.6 yards per carry. But of course, the biggest surprise was the fact that Reese McCall, despite not being expected to play, absolutely lit it up. He scored the opening points of the game, when in the first quarter, he connected with Burt Jones on a 20-yard touchdown pass to make it 7-0. Then in the fourth quarter, with the Colts leading at 24-21 and really needing a touchdown to give themselves some breathing room, he scored from 10 yards out after connecting with Greg Landry. By the time the game ended, McCall led the team with 5 receptions, led the team with 85 yards, and led the team with 2 touchdowns. This game tied a career high in receptions, tying his mark from Week 5 against Buffalo, set a career high in yards, breaking his previous high of 80, and set a career high in touchdowns, as this was the first multi-touchdown game of his entire career. It was a truly stunning performance. And after the game, all the talk was about how the heck Reese McCall pulled that off, and how he went from injured and not even playing to being the hero of the game. Quarterback Greg Landry said, Reese had been nursing a sore shoulder. Not only did he make some key catches, but he came in and blocked real well too, on that sore shoulder. I can see Reese developing into the kind of tight end people felt he would be. And this game was a massive adjustment for McCall considering his physical limitations, especially in the blocking game. As he said, I felt the pain a couple times. It's just a thing where you have to block differently from the way you usually block. You're usually used to blocking with your shoulder, but now you have to block with your head. McCall felt that this was a statement game for him, considering the circumstances, and he said that hopefully this game eased the doubts that people had about his receiving abilities, especially since he had no touchdowns and minimal production in that department coming out of college and as a rookie in 1978. He said on that front, people are going to have their own opinions about my receiving ability. You can't please everybody all the time. You just have to go out and play as well as you can. I'm not going to say I'll catch every pass, but I'll do what I have to help the team win. Alas, he did not do that going forward. Perhaps the strangest part about this entire game was that it was not a sign of things to come, as McCall really didn't do a whole lot for the rest of his NFL career. This game was a complete fluke. He only played with the Colts until 1982, recording 89 receptions for 1,338 yards and 12 touchdowns. In his final season with the Colts, which was the strike-shorted 1982 campaign, he had just 2 receptions for 6 yards and had lost his starting spot. Even for the rest of 1979, McCall did absolutely nothing, as he never found the end zone for the rest of the season and didn't have another game that year with more than 3 receptions. McCall played in the NFL until 1985, playing his final 3 seasons with Detroit, though he did next to nothing there, catching 5 passes total for 28 yards and no touchdowns. By the time his career ended, the most receiving yards he had in a game was 85, which came on this day against Cincinnati. The most receptions he had in a game was 5, which came on this day against Cincinnati. And the most receiving touchdowns he had in a game was 2, which came on this day against Cincinnati. There's no debating it. This was easily the best game of Fred McCall's career, and there was no close second. And of all the 117 games that he played in throughout his 8 years in the National Football League, it's absolutely hysterical and remarkable that this game of all games was his shining moment and crowning achievement. He legitimately was not even supposed to play. An hour before the game, he was in street clothes and was ruled out. He didn't fully know the game plan, he was not even close to 100%, and I don't even know if he was mentally ready to play, because it can be extremely tough to get into that mindset right away after being out for 3 weeks, especially after having no expectations the hour before kickoff. Nothing about this performance makes any logical sense whatsoever. But for Reese McCall, when he needed to under the most unlikely of circumstances, he definitely answered the call. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at Jaguar Gator 9. To see college football videos, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.